Hello, my name is Guillermo. I'm a PhD student here at the Faculty of Sciences of the University of Lisbon, and I'm going to be talking about my experience working in marine conservation research in Sao Tome and Principe. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today falls within these three topics. So it would be fish, fisheries, and coastal livelihoods. So I wanted to start by giving you an introduction as to why this is important for marine conservation. So marine ecosystems are impacted by multiple threats, and on the top of those threats is fisheries impacts, particularly in coastal environments. When we talk about fisheries, we normally distinguish between large scale and or industrial fisheries, and in the other end of the spectrum, we have small scale fisheries. So small-scale fisheries change a lot from country to country. There isn't a single definition that fits all of them. But one thing that they all tend to have in common is that historically they have not been managed. They are very often excluded from fisheries statistics, and they are not really valued for their actual contributions to society. The thing is, when we look at the actual numbers, small-scale fisheries are not small. Most of the fishers in the world are small-scale fishers. Also, almost half of the global catches comes from small-scale fishing, and most of the small-scale fisheries are in developing countries. And there they provide millions of, they provide they provide food and income and livelihood opportunities for millions of families and coastal communities. So another thing that unfortunately most small-scale fisheries have in common is that most of them are declining. So basically, it doesn't matter where you go. If you go to Sao Tome and Principe or to go, I don't know, the Philippines, they're going to tell you, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I used to fish less hours and I used to catch a lot more fish. Now we are fishing many hours and we are using a lot of hooks and we are catching a lot less fish. And this decline in fisheries catches is obviously impacting the marine environment, but it's also impacting the lives of the people that depend on the marine environment. So to reverse this trend, basically, marine protected areas have been increasingly used and advocated as a way of protecting both the marine environment and the people that depend on the marine environment. And the theory behind the MPAs is that if you have an area that has been impacted by fishing, you can put there an MPA and fish are going to grow inside. Eventually, they're going to spill outside and they're going to feed the surrounding fisheries. So that's the theory. In theory, MPAs can deliver both social and ecological benefits, but in practice, it's not always like that. So very often, sometimes MPAs are designed taking into account only ecological criteria and not paying much attention to the people that are already living there. And that can have very strong negative social impacts on coastal communities, which can also lead to a failure of the MPAs, because if people cannot comply with the MPA because the impacts are too strong, where they're going to keep on fishing and the MPA is not going to work. So basically, we're trying to move away from this sort of like framework, and we're trying to move, which could be, I don't know, like nature without people, and we're trying to move towards a framework in which we acknowledge that people and nature are linked. So we are trying to build resilient socio-ecological systems. What that means in practice is that we need to integrate both social and ecological perspectives, and also that we need to involve resource users and coastal communities in all the steps of the process. So we need to involve them in research, in the design of management and conservation measures, and on the implementation of those measures. Okay, so now I wanted to start by giving you an overview of artisanal fisheries in Sao Tome and Principe. So as you may know, Sao Tome and Principe is a small island developing state in the Gulf of Guinea. It is an archipelago of oceanic islands, meaning that they are basically two big volcanoes emerging from the bottom of the ocean, and that means that the water surrounding them is very deep, and also the islands have very narrow insular shelves. So that means that the shallow areas between around the island are very narrow. So that means that there is not a lot of space for coastal demersal fish to grow, which makes coastal demersal fish quite sensitive to the impacts of fishing. In Sao Tome and Principe, fishers are typically men. Fish traders are called palayés. They are typically women. And Sao Tome and Principe is considered to be one of the most fisheries-dependent countries in the world. Obviously, because of nutrition, so fish is the base of the diet for many people, but also because the artisanal fishery sector generates employment for thousands of people. Despite this importance, small-scale fisheries in Sao Tome and Principe are not really managed. So they operate in an almost open access regime. And in the long term, that has led to a degradation of the marine environment, which is resulting in lower fisheries catches, which in turn is impacting the lives of local communities. So basically, in this context, in 2017, a consortium of local and of national and international organizations came together to try to improve management of marine resources in the archipelago. So eventually, that has led to the design of a network of MPAs involving fishers and involving fish traders and the government in the process. And the MPAs were approved in 2025, I think, but they are not yet operational. So they have been approved by the government, but still need to be put in place. So those are the next steps. What I wanted to talk about here is the research that supported this process. So basically, to design effective MPAs, you need data on fish, you need data on fisheries, and you need data on the people that depend on fish and fisheries. So basically, to get started in that order, about fish, when I arrived in 2017, there was not a lot of data on fish, so we basically decided to start collecting our own. We decided to go for a methodology that is called baited remote underwater video, and we went for this methodology because it's first, it can be made relatively low cost. So basically, you just need a frame that supports a camera. I forgot to say, BRAVS is basically what the name says. So it's an underwater camera that sits in the bottom and records uninterruptedly for an hour, and it has a bait in the front, and that's it. After an hour, you pull the camera up, and then you have your video and you count your fish. So as I was saying, BRAVs can be made relatively low cost. So ours were made out of PVC. The main cost were the cameras and the fuel. They are non-invasive, so they're really good if you want to monitor MPAs, and they do not require previous knowledge on fish species. So for us that didn't have, a comprehensive species list, this was a very good method. BRAVs measure relative abundance, and from 2018 to 2020, we deployed over 400 BRAVs. BRAVs help us identify priority habitats for conservation. So basically, rocky reefs and marl had a higher abundance of species targeted by artisanal fisheries, and therefore they were priority. They were considered a priority when designing the MPAs. And this data also is provided the baseline that will be used in the future to test the effectiveness of the MPAs. Also, I just want to finish this section mentioning that BRAVs were, well, they're really good method to give back to the communities. So BRAVs provide a perspective of the ocean that people in coastal communities don't have access to. Even though they live right by the ocean, they don't normally have this perspective of the sea. So in terms of community engagement and, well, giving data back to the communities, BRAVs are a really good method. So we knew the fish of Sao Tome and Principe a bit better. Now we wanted to understand the fisheries as well. So the first thing to know about small-scale fisheries is that they are very complex. They use multiple gears to target many different species, and they are very remote, and they are sometimes very remote, and they're also decentralized. So to give you an example, a small island such as Sao Tome has 35 landing sites, and they are distributed all over the island. And because of the state of the roads, getting to some of those landing sites is really difficult. So if you want to capture seasonal patterns and you want to capture gear variability and spatial variability, you cannot rely on conventional methods because, well, because the task is too big. There's too many variables. So you need to think of another methods. So basically, what we did was first to do a qualitative assessment of the fishery. So that meant going to the communities, talking to the people there, talking to fishers and fish traders, asking them how do you fish, what the species you catch, and what are the local names that you use for each of them. Eventually, we came up with a classification of the different fishing techniques, and we used all this information to build a questionnaire using the platform that you see there. It's called Kobo Toolbox. So basically, well, between other advantages, one of the advantages of this is that you can collect many different types of information. So, for example, you can take pictures, and also it improved species identification because species were chosen using a picture rather than writing down the local name. But the most important thing I want to show you here is that fishers and fish traders were hired to collect the data. So basically, it was people from the communities that already had knowledge on the fish species and the fishing gears that collected the data for the project. So they were part of the project. They were already there, and they were the people collecting the data, and they were also involved in the questionnaire design. So basically, once we produced the questionnaires, they tested them and they gave us feedback saying, "Hey, this worked, this doesn't work, this question is not appropriate." So they were involved in the whole process. Eventually, after 4 years, we collected information on 12,000 fishing trips, and, well, that produced very detailed information on seasonality, on the species caught, and also which gears are used to catch which species, sometimes to very high resolution. So basically, we knew that certain types of bait are used to catch certain type of species and not others, which is information that is quite relevant for fisheries management. Also, again, another thing that we did was to return the data to the communities. So we produced fact sheets like these ones, and, well, basically, with these fact sheets, we tried to, well, basically show them what the data was being used for. Finally, another thing that we did and was quite important for the design of the MPAs was to understand where fishers go fishing. So basically, we use a combination of GPS trackers and going with the fishers to the sea to have the location of the MPAs of the fishing grounds. Also, we did participatory mapping exercises in which we tried to determine the relative location of the fishing grounds. And eventually, we came up with a map that looks like this. in which we have both the names and the boundaries of the fishing grounds that the people use. This map allowed us to go back to the landing surveys data and to extract the information on the fishing grounds. So basically, where fishers went fishing, and we were able to produce gear-specific effort maps such as this one. So we know about the fish. We also knew about the fisheries. Now it was quite important to understand well, the people that depend on that fish and those fisheries. So the main thing I want to talk about here is that fisheries don't occur in isolation. They happen within a broader social context and livelihood system, and this social context can be severely impacted by shocks. And restriction caused by marine protected areas can be a shock. So basically, most of the occupations in coastal communities are based on the use of natural resources, and if you restrict the access to those natural resources, it can have a very strong socio-economic impact. So that is why any livelihood intervention, such as the design of MPAs, has to be carefully planned to make sure that it doesn't have a negative impact on people. So that is why the project has other components. So for example, every 2 years, the project does household surveys to measure social vulnerability, to assess social vulnerability, and to see potential changes on perception of marine conservation issues. So that is an activity that is led by one of my supervisors. In 2020, I did a value chain assessment to understand the broader, not just the fisheries, but also like the artisanal fishing sector as a whole. And the project also does a livelihood diversification activities. So this is not something I'm personally involved with, but well, just so you have an idea, in Sao Tome and Principe, as I was saying, there are not a lot of livelihood options. So in coastal communities, there is a very strong reliance on fish. So basically, reducing that dependence is very important for the success of the MPAs. I wanted to finish this part also showing you that, well, fish, that understanding the broader livelihood context is quite important to design any livelihood intervention. So basically, in coastal communities, even though they have several occupations and they have several options, in the end, most of the occupations that they have depend on the income that comes from fishing. And when there is no fish, also all of the other occupations, as they say, they literally say, when there is no fish, everything stops. So that has implications, for example, for the design of livelihood diversification activities. And I wanted to finish by showing you this slide, which is to show you that it's also really important to consider other aspects. So basically, in 2020, when COVID hit, we did a telephonic survey to understand the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19. And one of the things that we saw was that women's livelihoods were a lot more impacted than men's livelihoods because of COVID. That is probably related to the fact that the occupations and assets that women can access are a lot more restricted because of cultural norms. So that again highlights the need of considering gender aspects when designing conservation actions and livelihood interventions. So to take home, I wanted to go back to the beginning and focus on the two main messages that I wanted to transmit with this presentation, which is first, marine conservation research is not all about fish. So we need to consider the broader So we need to consider the broader livelihood context and integrate social and ecological information. And to finish, that well, participatory research well is the first step to integrate coastal communities into conservation. But it's not only that. Sometimes participatory research is the only way that you're going to be able to obtain data. So you're not going to be able to obtain certain types of data if you don't work with the communities. Just to finish, if you want to know more about the project, there is a paper that is written um, by one of my supervisors and the people in the project that you can read if you want to know more, and also you can visit the website of the project. So that's it. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please let me know.